Thank you for joining us on that experiment. I should have said this to begin with. It's so good to be with you all. I've heard a lot of great things about you from Reverend Emily, and it's just been a delight to meet some of you as you were filing in here. And thank you for the welcome you've given me, and thank you also to everybody who's behind the scenes making the Zoom go and the slides go, and just generally making this community happen. For our reading today, I've chosen a poem called "This Grace That Scorches Us," which is by Jan Richardson. And Richardson is an artist, she's a writer, and she also happens to be a United Methodist Church minister. Here's one thing you must understand about this blessing. It is not for you alone. It is stubborn about this. Do not even try to lay hold of it if you are by yourself, thinking you can carry it on your own. To bear this blessing, you must first take yourself to a place where everyone does not look like you or think like you, a place where they do not believe precisely as you believe, where their thoughts and ideas and gestures are not exact echoes of your own. Bring your sorrow, bring your grief, bring your fear, bring your weariness, your pain, your disgust at how broken the world is, how fractured, how fragmented by its fighting, its wars, its hunger, its penchant for power, its ceaseless repetition of the history it refuses to rise above. I will not tell you that this blessing will fix all that. But in the place where you have gathered, wait, watch, listen. Lay aside your inability to be surprised, your resistance to what you do not already understand. See then whether this blessing turns to flame on your tongue, sets you to speaking that you cannot fathom, or opens your ear to a language beyond your imagining, that comes as a knowing in your bones, a clarity in your heart that tells you, this is the reason we were made, for this ache that finally opens us, for this struggle, this grace that scorches us towards one another and into the blazing day. So there's this question that I'm sure some of you have heard. It's a question that almost anyone who's been around UU spaces long enough has probably gotten asked in one form or another. Since we're a non-creedal faith, just what exactly is it that we worship on Sunday? Since we're a faith that doesn't have one single set of beliefs about the divine and sometimes doesn't have any beliefs about that, why do we bother going to church on Sunday or to whatever this is, since we often don't call it church, it's a fellowship? Now, if you're like me, you might be tempted to dismiss this question out of hand, especially since it often seems to imply some kind of judgment or disdain for our UU faith tradition that we hold so dear. But I also think that it's a question that we don't stop to ask ourselves very often. So I want to spend some time reflecting on it, because I think it can be helpful to answer that question. Why do we gather together? Just what exactly is it that we're doing here in this room and on this Zoom screen right now? And whatever the why is, whatever the reason is for this gathering that we're in today, how can we best work towards that? Now, obviously, there are so many answers to that question. There are at least as many answers to that question as there are people here today. As with most questions, if you ask it to 3 UUs, you're probably going to get at least 4 answers. But there are some themes. And one theme that I hear over and over from UUs when they talk about why we gather is care. Care for self and care for others. care for the world. We come to this community with a desire to care for our hearts. As a reading by Jan Richardson this morning reminds us, and as Catherine reminded us during our lighting of joys and sorrows, we bring a lot to this community. We bring our sorrows, our grief, our fear. We bring our weariness, our pain, and our disgust at the broken world. And we bring these pains and worries here because we expect to receive care for them. To echo Richardson's words from our reading, I will not tell you that this blessing will fix everything. I won't tell you that this community will fix all that. It won't. Coming to this community won't suddenly make any of our problems disappear, and it won't suddenly alleviate any or all of our aches and anxieties. But coming to a community like this one can lessen the burden of those aches and anxieties. There's a healing power present here, present in this room, and present on Zoom. It's a gentle healing power. It's gentle, but it's a life-changing one. It's the power of a dear friend asking, "How are you?" The power of a hug, like so many that I saw as you all came into this space today. It's a healing power of seeing a screen full of familiar faces on Zoom when we're unable to leave our homes. I think we sometimes undervalue that power. So I want to be clear, that power, the power of a caring community in this world, it's transformative. That power transforms us from being alone in our pain and in our worry to being supported in them. The power of a caring community transforms our hearts from hurting to healing. And tending to our hearts, we're also transforming them. And I want us to linger a while with this idea of transforming hearts, because I think that our UU communities are, at their very best, engaged in that slow but steady work of transformation. Now, it happens in a number of different ways. Some of them are the ones that I was just talking about, that care that we give to one another, the care that heals our inner wounds. But that's not the only way that transformation is happening here. Transformation is also happening in the way that our communities help us to make our hearts ever more open, in the way that our communities call us to become ever more loving people. Now, I know that this point might sound a little woo-woo or a little abstract, but stay with me, stay with me. So often when I hear UUs talk about why they attend a UU congregation, they talk about it lifting their spirits. They talk about the way that it brings them joy and the way that it introduces new things into their life, good things. People talk about how much they love the music, or how much inspiration they get from listening to poetry or other readings, or how much they appreciate hearing a rousing sermon, which this may or may not count as, depending on how the rest of this goes. Whatever it is, for most of us, we come here every week and we enter one way. And then when we go out that door, we leave another way. We leave with our hearts more full than we entered, more full of peace and joy and love and gratitude. We have been, by definition, transformed. And sometimes that transformation happens in ways that surprise us. In my home congregation in Brooklyn, I belong to a young adult group. And recently, that group had a discussion about why we as young adults are UU, why it is that we come week after week to the congregation on Sunday morning. And there was one reflection that really stood out to me. It was from one of my peers who's about the same age as me, and he's been coming to the congregation for about as long as I have, about 2 years. And he told us that when he had first come to that congregation, he proclaimed himself a devout atheist. And when he joined, he didn't want to hear anything about God. He was just looking for community. And yet, he found that one of his favorite things about the congregation was our Sunday worship services. The music, the sermons by our senior minister, Reverend Anna Levy-Lyons. Heck, he even found that he liked the time of silent prayer and meditation. Now, he wasn't quite ready to call himself spiritual or to drop that label of being an atheist, but he had found himself changed by the congregation, opened to new things. And that change, that opening, it wasn't a given. In order for it to happen, he had to be ready to receive it. He had to be open to it. He had to let go of his ideas of just what exactly he was going to be getting out of a U congregation. I highly doubt that that friend has encountered the reading that I chose today from Jan Richardson, that he knew that he was heeding its call. But he has been. He's been heeding that call fully. Truly, he has embraced Richardson's call to lay aside your inability to be surprised, your resistance to what you do not already understand. My UU friend has allowed himself to be surprised by our congregation. He's let go of the comfort of what he knew and his desire to control how he was growing, and he's stopped resisting his idea that he could never be anything but an atheist. He's kept his heart open to the possibility that something new might happen on Sunday morning. And in the end, he's found himself happier for it. Found himself pleasantly surprised by how the most overtly spiritual elements of our congregation fill him with joy. And at our best, that's what our UU communities do. We belong to a faith that calls us to the ongoing transformation of ourselves, the ongoing transformation of ourselves into people who are ever more alive, that calls us to the work of spiritual growth in our congregations, to quote our third principle. Now, it's one thing to be open to the possibility that a hymn or a poem or something like a prayer might uplift our spirits on Sunday morning. Even if we resist that possibility at first, we can eventually relent when we realize that it makes us happy. It's a change we can learn to welcome because it quickly bears fruit, because it brings more joy and ease into our lives. But all of us know that change can sometimes be a lot harder than that. That opening ourselves up to the possibility of something new is sometimes challenging, and that sometimes it's downright terrifying. There's a tension here. As UUs, we are, as one of our hymn puts it, a people so bold. We are a people who dare to work towards a world that is better than the world we have now. We declare our commitment to a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. That's our sixth principle. But baked into that principle, into that goal of a world marked by justice, is a recognition. It's a recognition that the world that we have is not yet marked by justice for all. It's a recognition that the world as it is not yet the world as it ought to be. And that recognition, it drives us to transform the world in so many ways. One of the hallmarks of our UU faith tradition is a commitment to social justice. And I was hearing about some of the great work you all have been doing on that front today from Susie. We have a commitment to activism and advocacy on the side of love in our communities and in the world at large. Together, we've been leaders in the fight for marriage equality and for reproductive health care, and we've contributed to pretty much every social movement that was on the progressive side of history, from civil rights in the 60s down to today's fight for a greener future. But that's the world. The world is what needs to be transformed, and the world is out there. And here we're good, right? We're the good guys, aren't we? As UUs, we really care about doing the right thing. We care so much about leading with love and about working towards justice. And because we care about that, because those are the core of our tradition, sometimes it can be especially hard for us to admit when we fall short. But sometimes we do. Sometimes we do fall short. That fact has been made clear over the last few years. If our shortcomings weren't already apparent, they've been revealed by the conversation around the eighth principle, by the brave testimony of UUs of color who have pointed out the reality that, yes, racism does exist within UU communities. Now, that is an important conversation, but this is not an eighth principle sermon. There have been and there will be many excellent sermons about racism and how it rears its ugly head in our communities here. There have been and will be many great sermons about the need to engage in anti-racism work in UU spaces. And we need those sermons. We need those sermons because we need to do that work. We need to do the work of anti-racism. But today's sermon is about keeping our hearts open, about keeping them open to transformation, and about keeping them open to the often surprising ways that we learn about our need for change. And what a blessing our siblings of color have given our UU communities. What a blessing they have given us in calling our faith movement to live out our values more fully. Yes, that message has come as a surprise to many white UUs. It's come as a surprise to many of us who believe that we were fully on the side of racial justice and that we were already doing the work. That's why we needed to hear that message. We needed to be challenged in that way. We needed to be called to change, and we needed to be called to transform ourselves for the better. This is the kind of blessing that can happen in community that we hear about in our reading today. It's the kind of blessing that, as Richardson puts it, scorches us towards one another. And that's a challenging kind of blessing. It's a blessing that hurts because it tells us a truth about ourselves and about our shortcomings. It's a blessing that forces us to look in the mirror and to see something that we might not like. But we need to keep our hearts open to those kinds of challenging messages too. Not just the messages about the world out there, but also the messages about the world in here. Because, beloveds, in order to transform the world for the better, we must also be willing to transform ourselves for the better. And oftentimes, I think that we forget that we are a part of that world that needs transformed. We come to UU congregations looking to finally find a faith community that shares our progressive values. And we find that here, we really do. But because many of us share those values, because we have so much in common, I think we sometimes forget that we can still be surprised here, that we can be changed here. But if anything, our UU communities are the perfect place to be changed. While we do share a core set of values, our UU communities are also spiritually diverse. Our one accepted belief, the one belief that we can agree on, is that all beliefs about God or not about God are welcome here, so long as they move us towards justice and greater love. Truly, this here is a community where we can come to heed the message of today's reading. It's a place where we can come to receive that Richardson writes about, the blessing she means when she writes, to bear this blessing, you must first take yourself to a place where everyone does not look like you or think like you, a place where they do not believe precisely as you believe, where their thoughts and ideas and gestures are not exact echoes of your own. Because that is the promise. That is the promise of our UU communities, the promise of this community. This is a place where not everyone believes precisely the same thing, a place where no one who's gathered here's thoughts and ideas and gestures are exact echoes of anybody else's. It's a place where each of us has a unique blessing to offer all of us, a place where each of us has a unique lesson to teach about how we can live more lovingly and more justly. It's a place where our differences can open up our hearts to new possibilities. And that is why we gather here. That is why we come together week after week, Sunday after Sunday. We gather to be reminded. We come here to remind ourselves of what we value. We come here to be surprised by each other, to be surprised by the world, to be surprised by the spirit of life and the spirit of love. We come here and we gather here to practice keeping our hearts open, to begin the work of transformation in here and out in the world. May all of us have the courage to keep our hearts open to new possibilities, to remain open to surprises, to listen when others point out ways that we fall short, and to embrace the work of transforming ourselves for the better so that we can do the same for the world. May this be so, and amen.